The former president is pushing ahead with his bid for a second term as special counsel Jack Smith is gathering new testimony and evidence in the 2020 election interference investigation. That is quite a split screen. Tonight, Trump was in New Orleans raising money for his 2024 campaign. There was no sign today of the grand jury hearing the election case, but the jurors are expected to meet again just 2 days from now. And I want to share what Trump said about the case earlier tonight.
Any thoughts on the upcoming possible indictment?
I don't know anything about it. I don't know. We have a crooked nation.
You don't look the guy who's concerned about two indictments.
I'm not concerned. No, I'm not concerned. We're legit. We have very corrupt people running our country.
Okay, so imagine this. You're the Department of Justice. You've got the full weight of the federal government behind you. You've spent months building a case. The president himself is out there on social media basically screaming that your target is guilty as hell. You've got witnesses lined up. You've got documents. You've prepared everything down to the last detail. And then you walk into that grand jury room in Virginia expecting a rubber stamp, and they just say no, like they flat out reject you. That's what just happened to the DOJ in their case against Letitia James. And I'm not talking about some close vote where a couple jurors had doubts. I'm talking about a complete and total rejection. The kind of failure that makes you wonder what the hell happened behind those closed doors. The kind of embarrassment that has DOJ officials scrambling to figure out where it all went wrong. Because here's the thing, grand juries almost never do this. Like, we're talking about a system where prosecutors have a success rate that's basically off the charts. There's this old saying in legal circles that a prosecutor could get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich if they wanted to die. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Donald Trump has already been indicted in 2 criminal cases. As for the special counsel, he is now focusing on a February 2020 White House meeting where Trump was briefed on election security. Meanwhile, Trump longtime loyalist and former White House trade advisor Peter Navarro is publicly defending his former boss and issuing warnings that sound an awful lot like serious threats. Navarro warned of a, quote, civil war as the result of the Trump investigations.
It's designed to favor the prosecution. The defense doesn't even get to present their side. No cross-examination, no rebuttal. Just the prosecutors laying out their case to a group of regular citizens who then decide if there's enough evidence to move forward. And they said no to the DOJ. Can you believe this? Now, let me back up for a second, because if you're not familiar with Letitia James, she's basically been enemy number 1 for Trump for years now. She's the New York Attorney General who led that massive civil fraud case against him, the one that resulted in hundreds of millions in penalties, the one that had Trump's business empire under a microscope for months. She's been loud about it too, not hiding behind legal jargon or trying to stay out of the spotlight. She's been front and center calling Trump out at every opportunity. So when the DOJ suddenly announces they're going after her for bank fraud, yeah, people noticed, people had questions, because the timing here is, well, it's not exactly subtle. This is October 2025. Trump's been in office since January. And for months before this indictment, literally months, he's been posting on social media about Letitia James, telling his supporters she's guilty, demanding that someone do something about her, making it crystal clear that he wants her prosecuted. And then, surprise, surprise, the DOJ moves forward with charges. Bank fraud, they said, providing false information to financial institutions they claim, serious federal crimes that could land anyone in prison for years. They brought in witnesses. They presented documents to the grand jury. They made their case over multiple sessions. This wasn't some rush job. They took their time. They built what they thought was a solid foundation. And the grand jury looked at all of it and said, nope, not buying it. Not enough here to move forward. This is wild, because what this means, what this really means is that even with every advantage the system gives prosecutors, even with the ability to control the entire narrative in that room, even with months of public pressure from the president himself, they still couldn't convince a group of regular Virginia citizens that there was enough evidence to indict Letitia James. Think about that for a second. These aren't legal experts. These aren't political operatives. These are just normal people who got called for jury duty, who sat through the presentations, who reviewed whatever evidence the DOJ put in front of them, and they collectively decided, no, this doesn't pass the smell test. We're not moving forward with this. The fallout has been immediate and it's been brutal. Reports are coming out that Pam Bondi and other DOJ officials were caught completely off guard, like they genuinely expected this to go through. They were planning next steps. They were probably already drafting press releases. And then they got hit with this rejection. And suddenly everything's in chaos. People are pointing fingers. There are whispers about internal discord at the DOJ, questions about who pushed for this and why, and whether anyone actually thought it through. And Letitia James, she came out swinging, called the whole thing a continuation of Trump's frantic misuse of the justice system. Said he's compelling federal law enforcement to act on his behalf, basically accused the administration of turning the DOJ into a personal vendetta machine. Which, I mean, when you look at the timeline, when you see Trump's social media posts demanding her prosecution, followed by the DOJ actually trying to prosecute her, it's kind of hard to argue with that characterization. Come on. So here we are. The DOJ just suffered one of the most public and embarrassing failures in recent memory. A grand jury, the easiest hurdle in the entire criminal justice system, just rejected their case. And the implications of this are massive. Not just for Letitia James, not just for this one case, but for what it says about the DOJ right now, about political weaponization, about the independence of federal law enforcement, about where we are as a country. All right, so let's dig into what actually happened here, because this story is so much bigger than just one failed indictment. This is about a pattern that's been building for months now, and it's starting to come into crystal clear focus. First, we need to talk about grand juries themselves, because most people don't really understand how they work. And that's important because it makes what just happened even more shocking. A grand jury isn't like a trial jury. You know how in a regular trial, both sides get to present evidence, both sides get to call witnesses, both sides get to make their arguments? Yeah, grand juries don't work like that at all. It's just the prosecution. That's it. The defense doesn't get to be in the room. The target of the investigation usually doesn't even know it's happening until after the indictment comes down. It's completely one-sided by design. The theory behind this is that it's just supposed to be a preliminary check. Like, is there enough evidence here that we should move forward with the trial? That's the question. The standard is probable cause, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Just, is there probably something here worth pursuing? It's supposed to be a low bar, and prosecutors clear that bar constantly. We're talking success rates in the high 90s. Some jurisdictions, it's literally 99% or higher. When a grand jury says no, that's rare. That's noteworthy. That's the kind of thing that makes prosecutors stop and wonder what went wrong. So when the DOJ walked into that Virginia grand jury room to make their case against Letitia James, they should have had every advantage. They controlled the narrative. They picked what evidence to show. They framed the entire story, and they still got rejected. That tells you something. It tells you that whatever case they built, it was weak, like really weak. Weak enough that even under the most favorable possible conditions, with no opposition, they couldn't convince regular people that there was probably a crime here. Now let's talk about the context, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is part of a much larger story about what's been going on at the DOJ since Trump took office in January. Trump has been pretty open about his intentions here. He's talked repeatedly about going after his critics, about holding people accountable, about making sure that the people who targeted him face consequences. He hasn't been subtle about it. And over the past several months, we've seen the DOJ move forward with investigations and cases against, well, a lot of Trump critics. John Bolton, the former national security advisor who wrote that tell-all book, he's facing a grand jury investigation right now. The DOJ is looking into potential charges related to classified information. James Comey, the former FBI director who Trump fired and who's been critical of him ever since. There are reports of renewed investigations into his handling of certain matters. Adam Schiff, the congressman who led impeachment efforts against Trump, he's dealing with DOJ scrutiny over his mortgage paperwork of all things. And now Letitia James, the attorney general who successfully sued Trump in civil court and secured massive penalties against his business. You see the pattern here? These aren't random targets. These are people who have opposed Trump, who have investigated him, who have criticized him publicly, and now they're all dealing with federal investigations or indictments. The administration would say these are all legitimate cases based on real evidence of wrongdoing, that it's just a coincidence that they all happen to be Trump critics, that the DOJ is simply doing its job enforcing the law equally, regardless of politics. But come on, when the president is out there on social media for months saying Letitia James is guilty as hell, when he's telling supporters she needs to be charged, when he's making it abundantly clear he wants her prosecuted, and then the DOJ brings charges, that's not the appearance of independent law enforcement. That's the appearance of a weaponized justice system. And here's why the grand jury rejection matters so much in this context, because it suggests that even when the DOJ tries to pursue these politically motivated cases, even when they have every advantage, the evidence just isn't there. The cases are weak. They're built on flimsy foundations. And when regular citizens look at them, citizens who don't have any political stake in the outcome, they can see through it. This is exactly what Letitia James said in her statement after the indictment was announced. She called it a continuation of Trump's frantic misuse of the justice system. She said he's compelling federal law enforcement to act on his behalf. And based on what we're seeing, based on the timeline, based on Trump's own words, it's hard to argue she's wrong. Let's look at some numbers here, because this is important. Public trust in the DOJ has been declining. A recent poll showed that confidence in federal justice institutions is at some of the lowest levels in decades. People across the political spectrum are worried about politicization, about the independence of prosecutors, about whether the law is being applied equally or whether it's being used as a weapon. In cases like this, failed prosecutions of political opponents, they feed directly into those concerns. When people see the DOJ going after Trump critics and failing to make cases stick, it reinforces the narrative that these are political hit jobs, that the evidence isn't really there, that it's about revenge rather than justice. The embarrassment factor here can't be overstated either. The DOJ doesn't like losing. Prosecutors don't like walking into a grand jury and getting rejected. It's humiliating. It raises questions about competence, about judgment, about whether the people making these decisions know what they're doing, and the internal discord that's being reported, that's significant too. When ABC News reports that Pam Bondi and DOJ officials were caught off guard by the grand jury decision, that tells you there wasn't unanimous confidence in this case, even within the department. It suggests that maybe some people had doubts, that maybe there were internal debates about whether to move forward, that maybe the decision to pursue charges was driven more by political pressure than by solid legal reasoning. Think about what that means for morale inside the DOJ. If you're a career prosecutor, someone who's been there through multiple administrations, and you're watching the department pursue these high-profile political cases that keep falling apart, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like the institution you work for is maintaining its integrity, or do you start to worry that it's being used for purposes that have nothing to do with justice? These are the kinds of questions that career officials are probably asking themselves right now. And when talented prosecutors start questioning whether they want to be part of an organization that's perceived as politicized, that's when you get departures. That's when institutional knowledge walks out the door. That's when the long-term damage really starts to set in. And look, this isn't just about the DOJ. This is about the broader rule of law, about whether we have a justice system that treats everyone equally, or whether we have a system where the powerful can use federal law enforcement to target their enemies. Those are fundamentally different things, and which one we have matters enormously for the future of democracy in this country. Civil liberties groups are sounding alarms about exactly this. They're pointing to these cases as evidence of democratic backsliding, of authoritarian tendencies, of a president who views the justice system as his personal tool rather than as an independent branch of government that's supposed to check executive power. The supporters will say that Trump is just doing what his predecessors failed to do, that he's holding corrupt officials accountable, that these people actually did break the law, and it's about time someone had the courage to prosecute them. But when the cases keep failing, when grand juries keep saying no, when the evidence keeps turning out to be insufficient, that argument gets harder and harder to maintain. There's also this broader question about what message this sends internationally, because other countries are watching this. Allies and adversaries alike are seeing the United States, supposedly the beacon of democratic values and rule of law, going through this kind of turmoil. They're seeing a president openly calling for the prosecution of his critics. They're seeing the Justice Department comply with those demands, and they're seeing those prosecutions fail because the evidence isn't there. What does that do to America's standing in the world? What does that do to our ability to lecture other countries about democracy and human rights when we're struggling with these same issues at home? These are serious questions with real consequences for foreign policy and international relations. So let's break down what this all means going forward, because the implications here are massive. First, this is a major blow to the DOJ's credibility. Like, you can't overstate how bad this looks. The department went after one of Trump's most prominent critics. They had months to build their case. They had the president publicly backing them. They had every advantage the system could give them, and they still failed at the first hurdle. That's going to follow them. Every future case they bring, especially against political figures, is going to be viewed through this lens. People are going to ask, is this another Letitia James situation? Is this another politically motivated prosecution built on weak evidence? Second, this probably emboldens other Trump critics. If you're someone who's been critical of the administration, if you've been worried about becoming a target, this grand jury rejection is actually good news for you. It shows that the justice system still has some checks in place, that regular citizens sitting on grand juries aren't just going to rubber stamp whatever the DOJ puts in front of them, that you actually need real evidence to get an indictment, which, yeah, that's how it's supposed to work. But given everything we've been seeing, it's actually somewhat reassuring that it still does. Letitia James is already using this as vindication. She's out there saying, see, I told you this was baseless. I told you this was political revenge. And now a grand jury has confirmed it. She's not backing down. If anything, she's probably more energized now, more willing to continue her own legal actions against Trump, because she can point to this as proof that his attempts to intimidate her aren't working. And that's important because James still has active cases and investigations involving Trump and his organization. The civil fraud case already resulted in massive penalties, but there could be more coming. There are ongoing monitors looking at Trump's businesses. There are compliance issues to track. There are potential additional violations to investigate. And now James has political cover to continue all of that work because she can say, look what they tried to do to me. They tried to silence me with baseless charges and it didn't work. Third, this creates a really interesting political dynamic heading into 2026. We've got midterm elections coming up, and one of the narratives that's been building is about Trump using federal law enforcement as a weapon against his opponents. This failed prosecution feeds directly into that narrative. Democrats are going to hammer on this. They're going to say, look at what's happening to our justice system. Look at how it's being politicized. Look at how the DOJ is going after Trump's critics and failing because the evidence isn't there. And honestly, it's a powerful argument because you've got concrete examples now. You've got John Bolton under investigation. You've got James Comey facing renewed scrutiny. You've got Adam Schiff dealing with DOJ attention. You've got Letitia James, who was indicted, but the grand jury said no. That's a pattern. That's a story. That's something voters can understand and react to. The counter-argument from Trump and his allies is going to be that these are all legitimate investigations into real wrongdoing, that the media is just trying to protect corrupt officials, that the DOJ is finally doing its job after years of letting politically connected people get away with crimes. And sure, that'll resonate with Trump's base. His supporters are probably thrilled that he's going after people like Letitia James. They wanted this. They've been calling for it. But for everyone else, for the persuadable middle, for the people who aren't already locked into one camp or the other, this looks bad. It looks like vindictive prosecution. It looks like an abuse of power. And when those prosecutions fail, when grand juries reject them, it reinforces that impression. Fourth, this raises serious questions about who's actually running the DOJ right now. Like, who made the call to pursue charges against Letitia James? Was it career prosecutors who genuinely believed they had a case? Or was it political appointees responding to pressure from the White House? Because those are very different scenarios with very different implications. If it was career prosecutors, then you've got a problem with prosecutorial judgment. You've got people who should know better, bringing weak cases and wasting resources on politically sensitive targets that they can't actually convict. If it was political appointees overruling career staff, then you've got a problem with political interference. You've got the chain of command being used to push cases that the experts don't think are solid, which is, yeah, exactly the kind of politicization that everyone's been worried about. Either way, it's bad. Either way, it suggests that something is seriously wrong with how decisions are being made at the DOJ right now. And the fact that Pam Bondi and other officials were reportedly caught off guard, that's telling too. It suggests there wasn't clear communication, that different parts of the department maybe weren't on the same page, that the decision-making process was chaotic or unclear. None of that inspires confidence. There are also practical consequences here. Resources were wasted on this case. Prosecutors spent months building it. Grand jurors spent time reviewing it. Federal dollars went into investigating and presenting charges that ultimately went nowhere. And meanwhile, actual crimes are going unprosecuted. Actual cases that might have merit are sitting on the back burner because resources were diverted to this political prosecution. Fifth, let's talk about what happens next with Letitia James specifically. She's not just going to fade into the background after this. She's got ongoing cases. She's still the New York Attorney General, and she's got every reason to continue pursuing whatever legal actions she thinks are appropriate against Trump and his businesses. This failed indictment actually strengthens her position in a way because now she can say, they tried to silence me and they failed. They tried to intimidate me with federal charges and a grand jury saw through it. I'm not backing down. And honestly, that's probably the last thing Trump wanted. He wanted her scared. He wanted her distracted. He wanted her dealing with her own legal problems instead of focusing on him. But this backfired spectacularly. Now she's got ammunition. Now she's got proof that the charges against her were baseless. Now she's got public sympathy as someone who's being persecuted for doing her job. The broader question, though, the one that should worry everyone, is where does this end? If the DOJ is willing to bring weak cases against political opponents, if the administration is willing to use federal law enforcement as a tool of revenge, then who's safe? What happens to the next person who criticizes Trump? What happens to the next attorney general or prosecutor or investigator who looks into his conduct? Because that's the chilling effect we're talking about here. When people see what happened to Letitia James, when they see someone get indicted for bank fraud right after Trump spent months calling for her prosecution, that sends a message. It says, if you come after the president, you might end up with federal charges. Whether they stick or not, just the process of defending yourself is punishment. Legal fees alone can be devastating. Even if you're eventually cleared, even if a grand jury rejects the charges, you've still spent potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars on lawyers. You still spent months or years under investigation. Your reputation has still taken a hit. Your career has still been disrupted. That's the punishment. That's the deterrent. That's not how a healthy democracy works. That's not how an independent justice system is supposed to function. And the fact that we're even having this conversation, the fact that this is where we are just 10 months into Trump's second term, that should concern everyone regardless of their political views. Look, I know Trump supporters are probably watching this thinking, finally someone's holding these corrupt officials accountable. Finally someone has the guts to go after the people who targeted Trump unfairly. And I get that perspective. I understand why people feel that way. But here's the thing. If the evidence was actually there, if these people actually committed the crimes they're being accused of, then the grand juries would indict. The cases would move forward. Convictions would happen. The fact that they're not, the fact that even with every advantage, prosecutors can't get past the first hurdle, that should tell you something about the strength of these cases. And if the cases are weak, if they're being brought for political reasons rather than legal ones, then this isn't accountability. This is just revenge. And revenge isn't justice. Never has been. Never will be. There's also the question of precedent here. Because once you open this door, once you establish that it's okay for a president to use the DOJ to target political enemies, that door stays open. The next president can do the same thing, and the one after that, and suddenly you don't have a justice system anymore. You have a political weapon that changes hands every 4 or 8 years and gets pointed at whoever the current administration doesn't like. Is that really what we want? Is that really the system we want to leave for future generations? Because once these norms are broken, once these lines are crossed, it's really hard to go back. The damage can be permanent. So where do we go from here? Honestly, hard to say. The DOJ could back off. They could decide that going after Trump critics isn't worth embarrassment when the cases keep failing, or they could double down. They could keep bringing charges, keep pushing investigations, keep trying to make something stick. My guess, this isn't over, not by a long shot. There are too many Trump critics still out there, too many people he views as enemies who haven't faced consequences yet. And as long as he's in office, as long as he's got the DOJ at his disposal, we're probably going to see more of this. But maybe, just maybe, this grand jury rejection will make prosecutors think twice. Maybe it'll make them demand better evidence before moving forward. Maybe it'll inject some caution into a process that seems to have gone off the rails. We'll see. Stay tuned because this story is far from over. And honestly, the next few months could determine whether we still have an independent justice system or whether that's just something we used to have. Pretty wild times we're living in.